The Next Chapter with Prim Siripipat is a production of iHeartRadio. Hey everybody, it's Prim. Welcome to The Next Chapter, presented by Baron Davis and Slick Studios. This week we continue the Transparent Conversation series, a nationwide, multi-city, multi-university tour and series addressing student-athlete mental health and well-being, where I, the host and moderator, help lead these conversations with different panelists on different topics regarding student-athlete mental health, and its initiative all being powered by LG Electronics USA. So, last week we talked about the role of support systems in student-athlete mental health, and afterwards we did a Q&A. So people in the audience would have an opportunity to just get involved in the conversation and ask some questions. So here I am at Lower.com Field in Columbus, Ohio, alongside Lee Kiefer, Olympic fencer and four-time NCAA champion and Notre Dame alum, and also her mother, Teresa Kiefer, who just so happens to be a psychiatrist. We're live. Yes, we are. Okay, let's continue our conversation. We have Lee and Teresa Kiefer. It's raining outside, but at least we're in the comfort of the van. Is this quite comfortable?
Very comfortable.
Right?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. I mean, for the people that can't see what this is like in the LG Transparent Conversations van, but there's actually some nice greenery. The designers on the ceiling. We have greenery on the ceiling, on the window. We're looking out at the crew members who are working so hard, and they're sitting out there in the rain, in the cold. Shout out. We got to give you all a shout out. I know. Go ahead and eat the popcorn. The coffee's going to go cold. Eat the popcorn. Maybe do a little happy hour while you're out there. Probably just violated something now that I mentioned alcohol. So let's continue our conversation. I loved Gia, but he had to run because he's got so much stuff going on. So this is the portion where we're just going to field some questions, and we're going to see where the conversation takes us, right? So even though this particular question was set up for Gia, I think we can navigate through it and maybe contribute to the conversation as well. So the question was, Gia, as a coach, knowing you're a pillar of support for these student athletes, how do you balance your own needs and mental health? And how do you avoid taking on their struggles? So that's obviously a really hard one. And Lee, you were mentioning as we were having our conversation that was something that entered your mind of how does he protect himself from all the things that are going on?
Yeah, that is an amazing question. When I visited him last week, I did ask, do you sleep? Because I'm convinced he doesn't need sleep to be able to spend all this time on everyone. But he says he does. I think a fencing coach's lifestyle is very different from a traditional 9 to 5. I think with practices being like 4 to 8 at night, your life schedule just shifts a little bit. Mm-hmm. You're gone on some weekends, but then maybe some summers too, you take more advantage of that with your family. So I think hopefully he's able to turn off sometimes, but I'm a little bit worried.
Yeah, that's such a great question. We were just at my alma mater, Duke University, doing another one of these panels, and I stayed with my former teammates, Kathy and Ramsey Smith. Ramsey is now the head coach for the Duke men's tennis team, and it was just nonstop. He had a player, immediately got into a pro tournament, had to figure out the Uber to get there, hotel. I mean, it's just constantly, and I think they had mentioned that was Ramsey's first night off when I was staying with them in like 60 days or something. Because it's just, because the tournaments are on the weekend. You have, all sorts of demands. But Teresa, I think from the view of a psychiatrist and a clinician, I think you would actually have a lot of insight just about how do you not take home your patients' issues and struggles? How do you put up those boundaries?
Yes, I think you don't, there's a certain point to where everybody is, your students and your patients are very important, but you have to be able to not personalize it. so that you don't go home and still struggle with your students or patients' problems when you're with your family. So you really have to have good boundaries when you're a coach or you're a therapist, and you know that as a psychologist,
Not yet psychologist, still a student.
Okay,
Still a
student
student.
psychologist,
Yeah.
but you're learning. Exactly. You have to be present when you are with that person, but then you need to learn how to let it go when you're not.
This is me asking from a doctoral student perspective and just getting advice from you. Do you feel like that is a skill that's eventually developed? Whereas, meaning earlier in your training or your career, did you find yourself taking things home more because you hadn't developed that skill of learning how to really shut it off and compartmentalize?
Personally, I can shut things off.
She's really good at that.
So basically saying you're really cold.
Pretty much. No, actually, patients ask you that all the time. It's just like, how can I feel so bad for you? I'm telling you all these problems, and you see so many people all day long. Aren't you exhausted? And I really don't want to tell them that I will forget your name the minute you step out of the store. I'm kidding, of course. I care a lot about my patients, but really, I do not have any problems with walking out of the office and being finished with it. And you have to be like that, because then you can tend to the next thing, like your family.
Right.
But not everybody is able to do that, and you do have to learn that. Some people really, really have to work on that because they have problems with boundaries.
I feel like even Dad, like when I was younger and he would come home, like obviously he works crazy hours, but like you could tell if he was like extra stressed or agitated, like he's definitely bringing work home with him.
And your dad, for disclosure, is a neurosurgeon. So,
Yes.
yeah, I mean, gosh, talk about high stress situations. And so I would imagine his schedule, is really. Does he have a set schedule? In the sense of, I mean, does he do emergency situations as well?
When he's on call, he does. And also when he's not on call, actually, when he's at work. Typically, his day starts at about 5 o'clock in the morning, and he goes all day. And he has clinics some days, and he has OR the other days.
Gets home at 6, so maybe
Sometimes.
it's just the exhaustion I'm seeing.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes, 6 on a regular day, but 8 to 10 on some other long days.
It's funny. I mentioned that my dad he's retired now, but he was an OBGYN. And I do think there's something a little bit different about the medical field where when you are working with patients, while it might get personal, right, because of someone's physical health is personal, there is something much more clinical. I don't know how else to describe it. Less personal, more impersonal. So I think it might be easier in some ways for doctors to kind of like walk away. That's not to diminish, what's happened, obviously, during the pandemic. We all know that the healthcare workers were overwhelmed and all the things that we're going through. But what I will say for myself, and I don't really know, we'll see what happens over the next 10, 20 years as I move forward as a psychologist. I do bring it home. I do. I really do. I do, not all the time, but there are moments when I'm sitting with a client. Last year, I interned at a college counseling center. So I was working with students anywhere from 18 to 26 years old. And then this year, I'm at the VA hospital, particularly working in their substance abuse rehab residential program. So the stuff that I'm dealing with this year is much heavier compared to last year. But nonetheless, anytime there's something new that comes up, and when I say new, that's kind of code for something that the person went through that was really, really potentially traumatic, or, and now you got to get authorities involved and all this other stuff, and it brings up a lot of things. And I have come home, and I guess the thing for me is like I've noticed that on my drive home, that will be my moment to walk away, cry if I need to, process it, be emotional. There might be some lingering feelings, but now I've gotten in the habit of texting my husband and being like, hey, just want to let you know, like, it was a rough day. So just, I'm gonna need a minute, you know? With my kids, I can actually shut it off. But with my husband, because it's adult to adult, you know, it's a little bit different. With my kids, I can really shut it off. So, you know, going back to the original question, you know, I think it's, you know, from a coach's perspective, I actually think it's even more personal than having to be a therapist or a psychologist in some ways, because you're constantly dealing with a lot of like personal and athletic issues. So I don't really know how somebody, you know, is able to balance that. I do think there is something about just having a little bit of separation and boundaries, you know. So maybe it's like, okay, I have these, he may not have all weekend, but hopefully, you know, Gia has some time with his family, and it's like, okay, dinners on Sundays is nothing. I'm not going to pick up my phone.
But he's unique, though. I don't. Gia is a unique coach. I mean, you've known a lot of coaches.
I know he's really close friends with some of the other coaches, and I think sometimes surrounding yourself with people who go through similar experiences, you can be around them, and then you can speak things or let them be unspoken, and you kind of have that outlet.
And the last question was, how do you avoid taking on their struggles? From what I've learned so far, in my clinical training is, I think one thing that I've really learned this year is you know, we're there to help, and we're doing everything that we can, but we are not there to solve everybody's problems. And Gia was not there to solve your problems. Like, you kind of had to go through that, right, during your freshman year. And had you not gone through that, you wouldn't be who you are today, and you probably wouldn't have accomplished the things that you accomplished. Like, that is, in some ways, the beauty behind struggle and adversity, is because it really changes us. So, you know, kind of when I'm saying, when I mentioned that Gia was there to support you but not solve all your problems, does that kind of connect with you?
For sure. And yeah, everyone's problems are different too. So when I look at him, like, how does he do it? He's just, a lot of it is being kind and listening to people. He doesn't have to be a specific expert on every single issue, and he's doing a great job.
Yeah. All right, let's go on to the next one. How do you think the role of coaches for student-athlete mental health might differ in a more individualistic sport like fencing and tennis versus a larger group and team dynamic like football or basketball? How do you think, I mean, I know you played a little bit of basketball, right?
No, we can't even say that. It was fourth grade intramural.
I can't even pretend. I mean, I was on a basketball team. Contribution, like, is not synonymous with Prim being a basketball. I'm pretty sure I had, like, negative statistics, if that's even possible. Yeah, I mean, do you have any thoughts about how do you think the coach's responsibility and role changes for an individual sport versus a team sport? I mean, my initial thoughts is just I think it's going to actually be much more intense, because when you're one-on-one and you have so much more responsibility, you know, it's definitely more intimate setting, that's for sure. And then in a larger team setting, I think a coach would, I don't know, as I'm kind of like working through this, I think it would actually be in some ways harder, because if you have 50 to 80 players, you know, on a football team, you really have to constantly be on your, you know, paying attention. Do you all have any thoughts?
Oh, that's a great question. I've always, wondered how I would have done from, like, a wellness standpoint, like, in a team sport. And I don't know. Like, I've had a lot of very, like, personalized interactions, like, even during lessons. We have, like, you know, like, 5 minutes to, like, catch up beforehand. But then also as an individual, as I've grown, I have a lot of freedom to make my own decisions, or, like, do my own coaching in a way. Like, I think as a team sport, you're, like, in a tighter unit. So I really don't know how that plays out.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. Here's a little piece of information. And this is as I'm going through my research apprenticeship and preparing for my dissertation and doing all these other classes. But I was really curious about the differences between individual sports and the experiences of team sports. So one of my good friends, Stefania Bell, who's a physical therapist and fantasy injury expert for ESPN now, but her and I are good friends, and so she passed along a study that where the results were that that individual sport athletes were at an increased risk for mental health issues, symptoms, and disorders compared to team sport athletes. And so I started doing some more research, and I stumbled upon a few other studies that also replicated those findings. In fact, one actually showed that individual sport athletes were more vulnerable to mental health issues and symptoms compared to not only team sport athletes, but non-athletes as well. And some of that they noted most likely had to do with, as an individual sport athlete, there's a greater sense of pressure just because the results in your performance is entirely on you. So there's greater preparation. There might be an internalization of failure, whereas like in a team sport dynamic, you get the support of your peers and also the results. There's a bit of like a diffusion effect where, if you lose or win, it's not just because of you, right? It's because of everybody else. But I found that really interesting. Do you all have any thoughts on that?
That makes sense, the reasoning behind it. I would say, so fencing is an individual sport where you're out there on the strip, and then before college, you literally don't have opportunities for team events unless you're at the Olympics or international. So I wonder, how, athletes who go to college and are on teams like fencing, like if they're healthier because like they're part of like the team community of fencing, or if that's just not relevant, like just being out there by yourself on the strip creates a lot of problems. I don't know.
What was that experience like for you? It sounds like tennis is really similar to fencing. I admittedly don't know a lot about the fencing dynamics and everything, but it sounds like you start out in an individual sport, and then as you go to college, it all of a sudden now becomes a team sport. Okay, that's the same. That's actually the same thing as tennis. So what was your experience like, kind of, because it's a shift, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of weird where you've been playing in this certain dynamic, and then you all of a sudden now it's like, oh my gosh, I have team members.
Yeah. There were times where I felt like I had to win everything, like because I was in this role of like being recruited with my accolades. I was like, well, now I need to be perfect because they're accounting for that, for like the numbers, which was not the case at all. That was short-lived. I would say my freshman, sophomore year. I think being on a team gave me more purpose and like a deeper love for fencing. It gave me the opportunity to like grow into a leader and like think about people around me versus just thinking about my results.
Yeah, I wish I would have had a little bit more knowledge. I think for me it was a major adjustment. The way I saw it from as a very like type A, achievement-oriented perfectionist, I just saw more expectations and more pressure.
Yeah.
And so when I went to Duke, I just thought, I was like, oh my gosh, it's already bad enough if I let myself down and my parents, but now if I let my coaches down and my teammates, and just like the tradition of Duke, or this prestigious school and program, I didn't want to let anybody down. And I think also for me too, hopefully we're not getting off too topic, but it's still relevant. But I think knowing that you can still be a good teammate and not doing all the winning. I wish I would have known that, right? Because being a good teammate is not just about like scoring all the points and logging all the wins, right?
You don't even think about the wins after you graduate. You think about the people and the bonds and, different adversities that you overcame. So, in the long run, being able to be a part of the team was the best part of my college experience.
And I see you getting emotional talking about your experience. So I'm sure it brings up memories maybe and old feelings.
Yes, I feel a lot. I feel too much. But good ones are coming up at this moment, like sharing it with my brother and some of my best friends, and then my husband too. Yeah, it was a long time ago, but it feels so fresh.
Yeah, I mean, but something could be so long ago, but if it's special and hits us at our core, like I'm sure, when we're 80 years old, like we'll always remember the feeling. I think that's the way I kind of experience memories. It's like you don't really remember the details. You might have flashes of certain things, but you'll always remember the feeling, right? And so it sounds like that's the stuff that comes up for you.
Definitely.
And I feel like you really enjoy the team wins that you have, whether it's in the World Cup or the World Championships. And when you guys, again, you talked about winning the national championship fencing.
Yeah.
In what year was that? The first time with you and Axel being on the same.
2017. Yeah, being a high-level athlete can be very lonely at times. So having a team experience where everyone feels the same thing together is very, I don't know the right word.
Special. It's moving.
It's moving.
Yeah. I mean, if there's one thing that I do know, talking about the next chapter, my show, and doing some research on athletes as they transition away from sport, I mean, it's really hard to mimic that experience, that the athletic experience where there's a shared mission, and there's a shared purpose, and everybody speaks the same language, and everyone's galvanizing and coming together for this one goal. And that's why I think that's why maybe it brings up so much emotion for not just you, but myself and everybody else, is because you know how special it is. And maybe deep down, like, that, and other athletes certainly recognize that you may never really experience it at that level, or certainly not in that way, right? Yeah. So I'm pretty sure we didn't answer that question. But that's okay. That's what this is all about. So the original question was, how do you think the role of coaches for student-athlete mental health might differ in a more individualistic sport like fencing and tennis versus a larger group team sports? I think, it's we definitely didn't answer the question. But I certainly, there's no question that it's different. In some ways, I actually think it might be a little bit easier in an individual sport because it's so intimate. At least I'll speak from a tennis perspective. The coach is always with the player. You know what they're doing, where they're going, what their intricacies are. So you're always on the pulse. And so it might be easier actually to read some of those warning signs if something isn't going right. But the caveat, what makes it a strength in individual sports might actually make it, a weakness in team sports, whereas in a team sport, you have so many people around you. The staff is so huge, and you have so many teammates that actually might be more beneficial, because if that one coach misses something, now you have all these other, in a team dynamic, you have so many other people to rely on. Teresa, do you have any thoughts? Maybe just from a mental health perspective about, do you notice anything when you're working with clients, just like the role of, again, going back to our topic of this conversation, just the role of support systems and how important that is for a patient's just general well-being?
Oh, definitely. And again, you talked about what you're doing right now at the VA, working with a lot of substance abuse. That's what I do, a lot of substance abuse treatment, and unfortunately, a lot of my patients have lost most of their support system, because of their addiction. So it makes it very hard to help them through these hard times, especially, when they just present to your clinic. So again, I'm still not sure if I'm going to be answering that question as far as team sports versus individual sports.
Yeah.
But the support is definitely, and the whole more like having the whole, again, your whole team in your clinic. You know, you have all the different components. You have your the therapist and the case manager and also the psychiatrist and all the nurses, all that. We're all a team to try to help, you know, all our patients. And again, as you mentioned, in a team sport, or actually in any sport, individuals, you have all those people working together. You know, it's not just really one person that's responsible, like, you know.
Yeah.
So.
No, your insight is actually really, really interesting, and you're right. And then adding on to what you were just talking about, in the short time that I've been at my externship, it seems like not only have they lost their support system, talking about veterans who are particularly dealing with any sort of substance abuse or addiction, but they may not have even had that support to begin with. A lot of them come from really traumatic or disadvantaged familial upbringings. So kind of, you know, as we're kind of talking this out, I actually think that from a mental health perspective, in some ways, for team sport athletes, I think they just have this built-in system, so there's more sources to rely on. I think in an individual sport athlete setting, individual sports might actually have to work a little bit harder to put their team together, right? And so it's like, okay, I know that I can rely on maybe my coach and my assistant coach and maybe these upperclassmen. And once those upperclassmen are gone, I got to find people to replace that with, and my family. And so it might take a little bit more work for individual sport athletes to kind of manufacture and manually create their support system around them. Okay, let's go on to the next. Teresa, this is for you. Your family is obviously close to Gia. What would you say to parents who maybe don't have that closeness with coaching staff with respect to supporting their student athletes?
If you don't have, not everybody's going to have a good relationship with their coach. I mean, we were really just fortunate, you know, to have a special person as Gia. You know, so I think it's really important to still stay close to your athlete, and make sure that that you continue to talk to them and feel out how they are doing in that environment. You know, so that because again, not all coaches are like him, and sometimes the dynamic is not always so smooth.
Yeah.
You know, so you always have to make sure that you do talk to your student, so to make sure they're safe and they stay healthy.
Yeah. Lee, do you have any thoughts?
There are a few programs where maybe they don't have a specific foil coach. So like maybe there's someone who's more in charge, but less of a traditional coach as we've been talking about. I've seen and I've heard of a lot of the upperclassmen stepping into the coaching role. So it evolves. I would say my sister a little bit at Harvard. I think she is a good example of someone who really became that person for the younger fencers.
Yeah, so maybe really, relying on other team members and other leaders, because leaders don't have to be just the coach, right? It could be the assistant coach. It can be people within your team. And, you know, I'm sure, Lee, you've had a lot of instances where you went into a situation, maybe it was even competing at the Olympics, and you still had to start from square one in terms of developing your relationship with a coach. But from your end, on the receiving end as an athlete, what are some things that helps you feel more connected with the coach?
Yeah. So we just had a new national coach take up this role. It's been less than a year. So I am in the midst of this process again. The first thing is just open and honest communication. I was like, hello, I'm a grown-ass woman now, and here are my expectations based off my experiences. Like, this is how we speak to people in a modern way. And I know that you're also human, and I would like to reciprocate the communication. Like, I don't just expect this person to take care of me fully. So having blunt conversations, I think has been a good starting point for this next step in my life.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like you weren't direct before? And you weren't as, you kind of like dance around things?
I think that I didn't know that being direct was okay. You would kind of observe other people, follow their example.
Mm-hmm.
And no one is ever upset if you're direct and kind. Like, those two things together, winning combination, and you can sort out any problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that is something that I've learned over the years too. Teresa, do you have any more thoughts about, just creating that closeness between a coach and an athlete, especially from a parent perspective? I feel like in some ways, as I'm, obviously I'm a young or newish parent, in some ways it kind of reminds me of coaching a little bit. Like, you have to be a leader in a family, and in some ways, there are some parallels with that. So do you have any thoughts?
Well, I think it's interesting what she was talking about, and the new women's foil team coach. So when kids start their sport, right, they start out usually like you when you were very young. Mm-hmm. So the relationship between you and your coach is very different than when you are already an adult, right? So I think, all of her coaches she's known prior to this new one, like, she's known them for a long time, and it started when she was a child. So it was a different type of relationship and respect.
Right.
Right? And so I think she actually, let me know if this isn't correct, but she did have a good relationship for the most part, like with all her coaches. Mm-hmm. But it evolved, right? And so now they do treat her as, well, of course, she's been an adult, but it had to evolve. But you always feel like the coach tells you what to do, because mm-hmm. that's their role, And again, it's all of a sudden you are the grown-up, and you are and so you have to make sure you make it clear that you are also in co-charge, mm-hmm. And it's both of you working for the same thing, because again, I think there are some coaches that want to tell their athletes what to do rather than actually just working with them. And again, I'm not an athlete, so I may be wrong on that, but you just want to make sure it's that you're collaborating, instead of ordering you to do things.
Mm-hmm. Put it this way: if as she's entering a new relationship with a coach, what are you hoping that this coach does, at least at this stage in her life?
She's on her own at this stage.
Oh, okay. That's true. Okay, how about
right?
when she was in college? How about when she was in college, 18 years old, going in, this is the first time that she's away from home, and let's pretend that she had an entirely new, somebody that you both never had a relationship with. It's not even Gia. What are your expectations from the coach?
Well, first of all, you hope that they're able to somehow read and anticipate what your child's needs are, right? Because you want them to feel safe, and you want them to also continue to excel. Mm-hmm. So it's that mixture, that balance between having the coach push your child enough to continue to be successful, but at the same time not overwhelm them. So of course, Gia did all those things, so we didn't have to worry about that. Mm-hmm. But I'm sure a lot of parents have that concern, that are they going to continue to succeed, at another level when I'm not there over their shoulder all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a delicate balance, isn't it? I think it boils down to the issue of there is no one size fits all when it comes to coaching, and the best coaches, looking across the board and being in and around sports, and some of the best in the world. I mean, so a lot of them have kind of like a template or a structure or a coaching philosophy that they operate off from, but they do shift and alter how they interact with their players depending on that person's personality, their needs, knowing what buttons to press, all of that stuff, because it really changes, doesn't it?
Definitely. And I think what you said, we actually talked about earlier about, it's not a one size fits all.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the coach and your player, they have to have good chemistry to really do well together. And sometimes you just don't have that. Sometimes personalities, no matter, how good you are, if your personalities just don't blend, even that's true, right, with parents and children, right? I mean, you can have the resume of a really good parent and a good child, but if you two butt heads, it's gonna be very difficult.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, if I was answering this question much more directly, in terms of what would you say to parents who maybe don't have that closeness with coaching staff with respect to supporting their parents? I mean, well, this is a little bit different because it's towards parents, but yeah, I mean, I would certainly have that expectation of, the coach really making an effort just to always be aware. I think the most important thing is just kind of what Gia said, is focusing on the person first. I think that a lot of times it gets lost in the shuffle and when, as they're moving forward with the relationship with the athlete, that they think, okay, I'm just going to focus on this person's performance. I think what a lot of coaches don't realize is that if you invest in the person, you're going to get the results from them from an athletic perspective, because the two really do overlap, the personal development and the athletic development as well. Okay, last question. Why don't schools do mandatory therapy for all student athletes? Lee, what are your thoughts? Looking back, I assume you didn't have mandatory therapy because that's not even a thing right now, at least not in all programs. Some programs may do some aspect of that, especially on the onboarding freshman process. What are your thoughts on if you would have had mandatory therapy heading in as a student athlete at Notre Dame?
Well, I had mandatory study hall when I was at Notre Dame, and as a young person, I was resistant. Even though there were obvious benefits, being told what to do about something you don't really know obviously causes rift, and I think that would just be the instinct for people if they were told, like, add another, hour of this thing you don't want to do to your week. I think it would be great if that was the norm, like the standard, like you don't have to do it, but this is what most people are doing, like to get to a point where like, oh yeah, like I love this resource, but a long ways away from there.
Yeah, so you think that you would have been a little resistant, and that's okay, because not everybody, therapy is not going to be for everybody. And also timing is really important. Like you have to kind of get to that point to want help and to want to change or to want to open up and talk, and not everybody is at that. It's a really good question. I don't really know, and I agree with you. I don't know if making it mandatory would be advantageous, especially if you built it into their schedule weekly. I don't think that's realistic, because student athletes already have so much on their plate, and to do it weekly, considering their travel schedules and training and school and all that stuff, especially if they're not really voluntarily engaging in it, I think that might be tough. But what I will say that I think a lot of programs are starting to do, especially the ones that have those resources, is they are making it mandatory. They're like building it into the system. So when freshmen come aboard, when juniors return to school, they're kind of seeing and meeting with everybody just as they would with having their, annual or semester meeting with their head coach, talk about their goals. They're also hopefully sitting down with the therapist, just kind of go over some things like, hey, I'm available if you need it. But Teresa, definitely want to get your opinion on this. Is this something, should schools make therapy mandatory for student athletes?
I think it's hard to make that mandatory because, again, it will be looked at just one more task, But I think it wouldn't hurt, though, to have somebody there and you start at least communicating or building a relationship with this person. So you just know, oh, this person is somebody that's easy to talk to, and like if I need them later, I won't mind talking to them.
Yeah.
So, but developing that relationship is important, and knowing that this is somebody you will trust later. But of course, when you have Gia, he'll just be your therapist, I guess.
Yeah, I work with a sports psychologist from the U.S. Olympic Committee, and kind of like that, the woman, I knew her for like 4 years, and I was like very resistant to like all these different activities and resources based off my age, where I was, like lack of information. And then I started working with her. I've been working with her for 4 years now, but like the same person, just her being present and just, slowly delivering her message and just understanding where I was. And eventually we met at the right time, at the right place. And it's really been amazing for my performance and my mental health.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's so great to hear. I think maybe it's not about making it mandatory for student athletes to attend therapy, especially on a weekly basis if they don't want to, but making it available to them. In a perfect world, I think it would be awesome to have a designated therapist or psychologist who's responsible for, let's say, 3 or 4 teams, because I think it's unrealistic to have one therapist or psychologist designated for one sports team, especially at a university with so many teams. And just having that contact and exposure and that casual conversation, it allows the student athlete to kind of develop that therapeutic relationship even before it's even begun. I kind of noticed that in my externship, where rarely the foundation of the day in their rehab is group therapy. So individual therapy is totally supplementary and kind of an additional component. But the longer they go through their rehab, which is only 30 days, and the more they get to know me, the more comfortable they become in just, okay, I'll do a one-on-one or whatever. Whereas like initially, no one's just going to walk up to me, rarely, and say like, oh, okay, I want individual therapy. I think it helps to develop some of that trust.
And you also learn a lot about the people you're working with in a group. Like you learn a lot of things that you may not pick up if you do an individual right away, right? And you can see how they interact, and then you can work off of that. And again, a lot of people will feel more comfortable, at least, if you can see a group of athletes just sharing, and they don't feel like they really have any problem, right? Where maybe by the time you go to individual, maybe you feel like, okay, now you've been sent to therapy, right? But I think perhaps in a group, it can normalize the problems, and you hear other people's problems while you're in discussion, but somebody's facilitating it who knows what they're doing.
So no, you make an excellent point. Well, as we kind of wrap up this conversation, the role of the support system for student athletes. I mean, we really kind of did this for about 2.5 hours between you, Lee, and your mom, sitting right here. So have you two ever done an interview or TV show or radio show or anything like this before?
Not me.
I had to pull out all of her nails and teeth to get her to join us today.
She did.
But she did a great job.
No. At first, again, we talked about it earlier, how she tried to convince me. I had so many good reasons why I couldn't come today. And then all of a sudden, as I was in the shower, I thought, oh, this would make me such a bad mom for her to have to make up reasons why I couldn't come today.
Hey, she's so brave. I also have anxiety, like speaking in public and in front of large groups. And you just gotta push yourself to practice. It's not like we were good at our sports before we started practicing, and amazing messaging, important perspectives. So sometimes, even if it's painful, you gotta do it.
Listen to you. You're talking like you're a professional or something.
So what was it like getting to be here with one another, engage in a different space, and probably engage in a different type of conversation that typically wouldn't happen at home? I will often, I say that because when I bring friends or colleagues who I am friends with onto the show, we talk in ways that we would never talk when we're sitting at a bar or at home or whatever, because there is a formality of when I ask you this question, you can't dance around it. You kind of have to ask because there are microphones in front of you. But in a good way, it really forces us to, in some ways, to have to answer those questions. So when I put it in that way, what was that experience like of maybe talking about things that you hadn't talked about before, Teresa?
We talk a lot, and I would, I feel very comfortable talking to her. It's more, I have anxiety about sharing with other people,
Sure.
Again, I always feel uncomfortable that if you're really going to say something significant, that you may be exposing your family, right, and you're always very protective, at least I am, of my family. And so that's what I always worry about. Okay, will I say too much? And, what will that mean? And what will people say or think, sort of. But, but we have good conversations. Sometimes it gets heated.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you recognize that this was for a good cause and like really, truly opening up and talking about your stories and all centered around your athletic experiences, Lee. I mean, it's been so awesome to hear about it. And I think a lot of people are going to be able to walk away and learn something from it. And any lasting thoughts for you, Lee? What was it like to sit here with your mom and talk about all of this stuff?
It was a really pleasant time. The way that questions are asked always elicit different types of answers, and we hit ideas and concepts we haven't thought about in years, or things that have evolved, how our relationship has grown. So it's just really interesting.
Yeah. Well, I hope it allowed you guys to connect in different ways, because I know that when I have these types of conversations with my parents, especially when it comes to my athletic experience, it is emotional because it's not just an investment from you. It's a family investment, and it changes how your family interacts. And those conversations, whether you have it at 28 or 32 or 36 or 40 or whatever it is, the type of conversations that you have will always be different because you're evolving, and so are your parents, and so is your relationship. But hopefully, as those conversations evolve, you can continue to grow together, and you just can also continue to learn with one another. And that's the way it's been for my parents and I. Of course, I'm sure if they came out here, they might say something a little bit different about how stubborn and resistant and tough I was as a child, and all of that is still true.
Well, this is true. That's why you guys are here. Is because you are resilient. You're, hard-headed, and you want it your way, and that's why you both have succeeded. Absolutely.
Yes, indeed. Well, the hard-headedness has to come to an end because our crew is freezing cold, and they're in the rain, and it's time to wrap up. So, Lee and Teresa, thank you so much for coming on. And Gia, who is not here, I'm sure he's tending to about 736 other athletes. But thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. I really do think that a lot of people are going to walk away and just walk away with more information and educated and really some good ideas about how to better their experience as athletes and hopefully as a family too.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
Great.
It's so enjoyable.
That's a wrap. Really hope you enjoyed today's conversation and took something away from it. Stay tuned next week for another episode of the LG Transparent Conversation series on student-athlete mental health and well-being. For all things LG Transparent Conversations, be sure to check out their website, lg.com/US lg.com/transparent-conversations. I know that was a mouthful. Again, that's lg.com/US/transparent-conversations. Also, for other episodes of The Next Chapter, be sure to check out our homepage on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also watch the full version of these interviews on YouTube. Just search for The Next Chapter with Prim Siripipat. And of course, you can follow me on all my social media platforms at Prim_Siripipat. The Next Chapter with Prim Siripipat is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.